All right, let's head out to the Zoom cloud. Mr. Warren Martin, Kansas Strong on the line with us here, getting ready for some state fairs, getting ready for some radio interviews, getting ready for some keynote presentations. Tis the season. You know, it's funny, Warren, because there's two kind of big end of the season sprints, if you will. You know, in the spring, kind of that May, June, you got the starter pistol of when kind of the summer events and spring events start. And up in the Bakken, it's usually the Williston Petroleum Conference is kind of that starter for it. And the Bakken Barbecue in Dickinson, it's the first week in June. But when I think of the end of the year, I just had Joe Sinnott on, and he's going to, the Shale Insight Conference out in the Marcellus, and that's an exposition. That's not an annual meeting because there is a difference. You know, you've got kind of that annual meeting, but you also have kind of some state fairs and some big expositions like out of the Marcellus with the Shale Insight. So you got all the above coming up. You got the state fair, you got the Cuyahoga and Ecoga, and I don't know. You got Kansas football, I would imagine. You got Arrowhead Stadium with the Chiefs coming around the pipe. So where do we want to start today? We'll probably want to. First of all, how you doing? Good morning.
Hey, I'm doing great, and you're exactly right. Chiefs, they play this weekend, last preseason game, and for the first time, I'll be in a suite at Arrowhead Stadium watching the Chiefs play. I've never done that before, so I've been to Arrowhead, but never up in their suites, and so I'm looking forward to that. That'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, this is here in Kansas. We predominantly with Kansas Strong, our year begins in August 1st. That's really when our year begins because that's we design everything, build everything around the school year. Here in Kansas, a lot of things really wind down during the summer. People are gone, kids are gone. There are festivals and stuff like that, but they're real laid back. And once August 1st hits, we're full on with all of our industry events that take place during the school year, as well as the state fair, as well as all of the school events that we do working with schools around the state. So it becomes very busy come August 1st.
That's interesting because in the media business, September is when we would always do our season premieres, if you will, and we're retooling the look and the feel of some of the radio formats and some of the podcasts, just because it's ours is September. Ours is September when we try to do it, and of course we're gathering that content in August during your busy season, and then we have to get it ready to go in September. And then of course October seems to be the busiest season for the annual meetings, and those are just as important as well. But really what we're talking about is the lead up to those annual meetings, because the way a lot of the oil and gas industry works from a corporate side, and then of course down to small business with the annual contracts that you get locked in, whether it be for pricing or for logistic supply chain reasons, is that October and November, December really are those decision making months, and then those January through October becomes the managing, if you will. What are you doing right now, Warren? Because you're busy. So I mean, the CEOs they want to talk to you, but at the same time, they got to prepare for all the above. I mean, it's like they're coming to their home stretch, if you will, for their annual meetings that basically are coming around. Like I say, October seems to be when those really kind of kick off. So, kind of what is your number one thing that you got going right now? What's your top message you're trying to get through to people?
Yeah, I think our top message is the same thing that we have been talking about on this show a couple times with you on the podcast here. Cuyahoga is going to be a big one. Ecoga is going to be a big one because of the nature of our annual conferences. We don't have big oil here. There's not the major industries that are going to be there. Corporate oil is not going to be there. What we have here is we have those small independent producers that are really struggling right now with the low price that we have on oil and gas right now in America. And what that's done is that's lowered our production here in Kansas. Even though the United States production is up, that's coming more from the shale plays, and that's coming from the larger wells and the larger producers. while the stripper well producers are really kind of dropping off a little bit because the price isn't high enough to continue doing the drilling, to continue doing those expanded operations. So this Cuyahoga, which is the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association, which is this weekend, and then in a couple weeks you're going to be down here with me for ECOGA, which is the Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas Association. You're talking about those stripper wells. I think it's going to be an important conversation where they get a chance to meet with politicians. They get a chance to meet with the powers that are important to our regulatory system as well as our legislative system, and help them understand that this is a new framework that's been created here in the oil and gas industry that the Trump administration has created. We're just now beginning to paint the picture of the landscape that's going to be inside of that frame. And Kansas has to be a vital component of that because we are the largest state. We have more stripper wells than any other state in the United States, except for Texas. And Texas could lose all of its stripper wells and they would still have a vibrant oil and gas community. If Kansas lost its stripper wells, we wouldn't have an oil and gas industry. And so we need to be a central part of that because stripper wells account for 15% of oil and gas. Without that 15%, we're no longer the number one producer of oil in the world here in the United States. So it's a vital component we cannot lose.
That 15% represents so much more, though, than the industry because, as many of the lobbyist organizations have pointed out for the last 20 to 30 years, pretty much every school system was built on the oil and gas industry in about a dozen states, Kansas being one of them, North Dakota being another one, Montana, Wyoming, Texas. I mean, you name it, a lot of the money from the oil and gas industry goes to education in some format. And then you've got just your jobs. And then in the Permian, that whole Midland, Odessa, every flower shop and every bakery is because of the oil and gas industry. I'm not familiar with Dodge City or Garden City, what the modern day worlds are, but I know that when I go out to Western North Dakota, if you took away the oil and gas industry, over 50% of those towns would disappear, if not more would disappear, because those flower shops and those cafes, they need the oil and gas industry to buy the lunches and the Three Monster energy drinks and the burritos and things like that come with the oil and gas industry. So how much of that is yours? I mean, you say that, there's no big oil there. So, I mean, we're talking about small businesses. We're talking about communities. How much is oil? How much is gas? How much of these are mom and pop shops, 25 people less, that type of thing? Give us an overview of that.
Yeah. So we have over 2,000 independent oil and gas producers here in the state of Kansas. The average oil company here in Kansas has 3 employees. The average oil company has 3 employees. So these are predominantly small operations. We have no major oil companies that are operating in the state, save one, and that's predominantly on the gas side of things at the Hugoton field. But so it's predominantly those small organizations. But you're exactly right. You went to Garden City. Garden City, the counties all around Garden City, almost all of them have 40% of the population of that county that their job is directly dependent upon the oil and gas industry. At least all of them in Western Kansas, in that area of Western Kansas, 30% or more of the jobs in that county are completely dependent upon the oil and gas industry. We're completing a brand new economic impact study right now for the state of Kansas. We have been saying for years that Kansas oil industry is responsible for 118,000 jobs here in the state of Kansas. We know that we've lost people in the oil industry. Our numbers have diminished as more people, as technology has improved, as more people take on greater roles, as production slowed down. We know that we were shrinking a little bit in the oil industry. So we're a little wary about those numbers coming out. But those numbers look at the direct jobs that are in the oil and gas industry, and then the indirect jobs that are dependent upon the oil and gas industry. If the oil and gas industry left, those jobs would leave with it. What we found is we went from 118,000 jobs. We did lose some of those direct jobs that are actually in the industry, but dependent jobs that are dependent upon the industry actually expanded to where the new report that's coming out is showing that we have now over 119,000 jobs in the state of Kansas that are directly dependent upon the oil and gas industry. That's a huge part of our economy, and especially in western Kansas, where you have counties. I don't know if there's a county in western Kansas where less than 20% of the jobs in that county are dependent upon the oil and gas industry. Many of them are 30 to 40% of the jobs.
And just think of all those different hotels and conference centers that without the industry doing, networking events and Christmas parties and just industry events, those would be gone too. Because
Absolutely.
without that baseline there to protect their overall operations, they can't make it off of graduations and people coming through town. I mean, Dodge City, it ain't Bonanza anymore. I mean, is that where Bonanza was, right? Dodge City, isn't that where?
I don't think the Bonanza was in Dodge City, but
Are you
some
sure?
Boot, Boot
I
Hill
think there was something famous in Dodge City, Kansas. There's a reason I know about it. Anyways,
well, Boot Hill's there, and you had Wyatt Earp, and you had all of those that went through Dodge City. So I don't know about the shows though, but Dodge City is a great example. They do have a huge casino out there, the conference center. Actually, I'll be in that conference center in October, speaking at the Kansas Economic Development Conference, talking about the importance of the oil and gas industry. But they're also bringing in a lot of manufacturing, industrial stuff. They're starting to bring into Dodge City and Garden City and other places. But if you want to bring in those types of things, one of the things that people often forget is if you want to go out and court a corporation to come and build a facility in your community, one of the things you have to prove is you have to prove that you have the people in that community to be able to fill the jobs that new industry is going to create. And so those are what are generally considered as secondary jobs. You got a ready population that would be able to take those jobs and be able to run that facility. What a lot of people forget is when 30-40% of your population, their jobs is directly dependent upon the oil and gas industry, the mass of people that you're able to draw from for the labor force to do these other industries is dependent upon that major industry that is the foundation, because those extra people that are able to work in those are the spouses of people working in the oil and gas industry. They are the sons and daughters that are working in the oil industry. They're the uncles and aunts. It is that foundational industry that brings people to that community that gives you the manpower to then court other industry to come into it. And a lot of people forget that and think, well, we'll just replace it with something else. But you lose that primary job. You also lose a lot of secondary workers that are filling these roles in other industrial components.
Gunsmoke was the name of the program that was set in Dodge
Gunsmoke.
City.
Yes.
Gunsmoke.
Okay.
So I was in the right ballpark, but different restaurant. We went into
I did not remember
Ponderosa.
Gunsmoke was set there. Yep.
Well, Gunsmoke's a little bit older than Bonanza too. So I mean, in fact, it's so old it was a radio program originally. I remember reading about in my history class in college that Gunsmoke was a radio program originally. So okay.
Yeah. It was a radio
program.
Bring up, go ahead. High school. It was a radio program when you were in high school, right? That was the history you were reading
Get
about?
out of here. What? I'm not that old. I'm in my year of Jubilee, pal. I mean, I got 49, so it's even though it's a banned book, I still like to read the banned books to try to get the entire capsule of what's going on. We're talking about the Bible very quickly there with the book of Jubilee. Sorry about that, folks. Didn't mean to sidebar there for a second, but I figured Warren would catch up on that joke.
Absolutely.
But I do want to go ahead. I do want to circle back to Gunsmoke and Dodge City and Garden City and some of these other towns that are very much reliant on the oil and gas industry. Number one, for your main employers, even though they don't have the numbers, they have the stability and the economic income, which is probably a double. It's probably a redundant double statement, but either way, oil and gas jobs, when you work within the industry, primarily are pretty good paying jobs. And as Warren pointed out, a lot of times the spouses and children become the secondary employees to those coffee shops, to those flower shops, to those oil and gas companies that maybe need a part-time accountant or a part-time project manager or something along those lines. But one of the parts that I think Kansas should be talking about, at least from a regulatory standpoint, is what's going to happen to the local communities. Because we saw this in the Bakken, was that this happened when the people got money, when they got mineral money for the first time in 40 years. You know, it was so dry for a long time, Warren, that they were, I mean, ends meet. That meant they were eating the ends of meat. They weren't trying to get two different ends to meat. No, they were eating the little bits and pieces to survive. That's the type of ends meat that was going on in Western North Dakota for a long time. Well, then all of a sudden it was like everybody won the lottery. And then they started going on cruises. They started going on vacations. They started actually enjoying life. Well, those were the people that were active in the PTA. Those were your community leaders that were on your local boards because they were natural born leaders. And that's the big change that happened out in Western North Dakota, was that sea change of your community leadership to where now you started having the outside influence affect your local community. And then you had crew camp battles. And I mean, it got so bad, Warren, they actually tried to disband the Parks and Rec Department in Gladstone, North Dakota, because somebody was trying to take bribes underneath the table to turn it into a man camp or something. I mean, it just got it. You know what I mean? It got out of hand basically because you had people that were coming into town that had leadership roles. They had no ties to the community. Carpetbaggers, in terms of, you know, that old term, grifters, if you will. They were coming in to make a buck and leave. So I don't know if you've experienced that in Kansas. I don't know if you have any comments on that. But that's one of those underlying issues that by the time you realize it happened, it could be too late.
Yeah, we really don't have that in Kansas because mainly because our oil industry here is so old. We probably did have that back when the booms were taking place and the majors were here, and you had those major booms that were taking place in operations. But as the majors began to pull out and these independent producers begin to take over, and you got all of these smaller companies, you really have people who own the companies that live in the towns, or at least the regions where they're working. And so there is a draw that comes from the industry, but it's really not at the leadership end that's bringing in the community. That's pretty stable with community leaders that have that worked their way up through the oil industry and have taken on starting their own oil companies and taking over leases and that kind of stuff. The influx that we're seeing is really a migrant population, and so you have a lot of Hispanics and Latinos that are moving north, going from Texas up through Oklahoma and into Kansas, filling these roles because it's a lot harder to find people in Kansas that are filling those roles. So there's opportunity there for them to come up and find a high paying job because we're paying higher wages in Kansas out in the oil field than we've ever paid before. And so these are good high paying jobs, even as a rig hand or a roustabout. They're good high paying jobs. And so really that influx that we're seeing in Western Kansas especially is predominantly a Latino population that's moving north.
Interesting.
And I will say they are adding to the community. They are changing community dynamics by bringing in their culture, but that's what America is about. It's about a melting pot where people bring in their best and merge. And, you know, and I think we see a lot more of that happening in Kansas rather than a takeover by leaders coming in and carpetbaggers or anything like that. We see much more of a merging of populations that's taking place in Western Kansas.
One of the things I would think that would be happening right now in Kansas, in the context that you described, would be very similar to when kind of there was the, I don't know if you want to call it a corporate takeover, if you want to call it a regulation, um, overreach, or whatever it was, but a lot of family farms, they just went away. I mean, we're down to a handful of dairy farms in each state. As ethanol grows and the sustainable fuel industry grows, you're starting to see corn more, so you're starting to see more corporate farming and that sort of thing. I could see that happening in Kansas as the regulations start to pile up, the stripper wells become capped, if you will, and they got to move on because there's nobody's buying wheat anymore. Nobody's buying, whatever the sunflowers like they used to, because you've got a kind of an artificial market. You've got a regulatory market that's really changed it, whether it's through subsidies, whether it's through regulations, whether it's through whatever it is. I could see that being an issue where community dynamics change because, hey, the numbers don't work anymore. Time to move on. Maybe it's time to go to Arizona. Maybe it's time to, move on to the next chapter type of a thing. Anyway, I'm just thinking out loud, Warren. I just was
No,
thinking.
I think you're
Go
onto
ahead.
something. I think you're onto something there because here in Kansas, we have agriculture is the number one industry in the state, and 89 out of 105 counties here in Kansas produce oil. Historically, if you go back and you look at the relationship between the oil industry and the agricultural community, obviously anytime you start talking about land and anytime you start talking about property and mineral rights, there are disputes that take place and that kind of stuff happens. But overall, the oil industry has been a bulwark that the agricultural producers could depend upon in lean years to continue with their operations. And you're exactly right. There is a huge push in America for corporate takeover of agriculture, taking over family farms, taking over ranches, and putting those into large corporations. And certainly that is happening to some degree here in Kansas. But one of the things that has prevented that from happening, full throttle, is the fact that these farmers and ranchers have oil and gas on their property that helps subsidize their farming operations through royalty payments or through land usage payments that keep them going through that lean years and enable them to hold out from selling out to these corporations. Certainly, if you take away the oil and gas industry, there's going to be a significant number of farmers and ranchers that have depended upon that income that probably would have a very tough time moving forward with their normal operations. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And it's not like if they pull out that a major oil company is going to come in and take those over. The majors have already left. They don't want to deal with a well that's producing a half barrel a day or 2 barrels a day. They don't want to deal with those wells. And the average here in Kansas is about 2 to 2.5 barrels a day per well is what's being produced. So the majors aren't coming back. If they shut down, they're gone. And so, yes, you're exactly right. It's all in an interconnected dynamic that we all have to work together in order to keep the state moving forward. And you lose any of those components, then it significantly changes the state of Kansas.
So you've got ECOGA this weekend? ECOGA.
ECOGA, the Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas Association, is in 2 weeks. That's the one you're going to come to, and you're going to join me on stage, and we're going to do a little keynote presentation at that annual convention coming up September, 12th or September 11th. September 11th, we'll be doing ECOGA.
I remember it was September 11th.
Yeah.
Yeah, that date forever in my memories, of course. And that's ECOGA?
ECOGA. Yeah.
Yep, at September 11th. And then there's COGA, right?
Kyoga.
Okay, see, I get these all mixed up, and this is why I need to have experts on like you. And that's this weekend, is that right?
That's this weekend. Yep, starts up Sunday,
so
goes
Wednesday. Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas Association, September 11th, And Kansas, what's the I? Independent?
Independent.
Okay, so Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association. That's this weekend. And what is that on the weekend? That's normally they're during the week. So is this like an annual meeting?
It's an annual meeting. Starts on Sunday with board of directors meeting, and the main crux of the conference is Monday. It's an all day conference on Monday, followed by golf tournaments, shooting clays, and that stuff on Tuesday following. But Monday's the big day where you'll have panels with politicians. You'll have experts come in with ideas on how to improve our industry here in the state, and it's usually a well-attended event, usually well over, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500, depending on how good the year is, 500 people or so that come out for that event. And so I think it'll be a good conference, and it's a timely conference because this is a critical time in the Kansas oil and gas industry. And so it is a time where we do need to be collaborating. We need to be on the same page with each other, figuring out what is the next step that we take moving forward.
What's going to be the number one theme coming out of that conference, do you think?
I think the number one theme that's going to be coming out of that conference, and a variety of different ways of looking at it, is how do we keep Kansas central to being a part of the new picture that's being created in this new framework that the Trump administration has put in place. And I think there's a lot of different ways to look at that, but I think it's really going to come down to stripper wells are a vital part of that. And we've got to figure out how to keep that in the forefront of this conversation, that people understand how important those stripper wells really are.
How close is a stripper well in Kansas from being labeled or regulated into a capped or an abandoned or one of those types of things?
Really, that's so here in Kansas, a lot of times you'll hear them called stripper wells or marginal wells. And
Yep,
there's really
yep.
not a level of production as far as quantity that would put it into that category. It's a matter of how often you're running your pump, and there's certain guidelines as far as how much you have to run your pump in order to keep it as an active well. But beyond that, the main component here in Kansas is not the quantity; it is the cost. And the marginal well side of it, which looks at the economic picture of that, once it becomes economically infeasible, then that's when you shut the well down. That's when you cap the well.
Yeah. Um, and then like all these wells, once the well is capped, boy, it takes a lot to get it going again because I mean it's just it's not that easy. And up in the Bakken and in Wyoming and up in the Niobrara and some of those places, it's it's crews. I mean, I mean, you got to assemble these crews from sometimes 5 different states. They got, I mean, these guys. I mean, when these guys are done, they're done, and some of them go to work somewhere else. Then, I mean,
Yeah.
they keep moving, and that's the part people don't get is that it's very difficult once those rigs shut down, to get them going up again. So yeah, I could see where right now, more than ever, is really important for these independent producers more than
Yeah.
ever with just the sea of changes coming, and whether it's the underlying ESG regulations that seem to be not going away, or just the PR side of things. So, um,
Well, if I can
yeah,
make one point on that, here in Kansas, on the eastern side of Kansas, which is why we have two different associations, it's because well production on one side of the state is very different than well production on the other side. And on the eastern side of the state, almost all of that, a lot of it is water flood and secondary and tertiary recovery efforts with major usage of water flood. And when you shut down a field that is dependent upon water flood, and the whole idea behind water flood is moving those liquids through the formation to be able to pump out the oil. When you shut that down, that's even harder to get restarted. And even if you get it restarted, it doesn't mean that everything's going to be where it was when you turned it off. And so, it's critical that we keep these operations going, that as we look at this new framework, we can create that new picture, that we need to be looking at a lot of these regulatory policies, a lot of the actions that are being taken, and separate out the difference between those stripper wells and other larger producing wells that are in the United States, because they're completely different operations. They should have completely different regulations in order to keep our energy flow where it's at here in the United States, keep energy as the major producer of oil and gas in the world, and keep our leverage on other nations by the production of energy we have here. We cannot lose that.
Here in Minnesota, where I'm currently at, we are getting ready for I think it kicks off Sunday for the great Minnesota get together known as our state fair. Kansas, I know you have a state fair coming up as well, and you've got a booth there. Talk to me about what you guys have going on, and obviously you're going to approach this one a little bit different than probably you'd approach one of these other conferences. I mean, you generally, you know how to read the room a little bit. So what's going on with the state fair this year? How are you guys engaging with the people?
Yeah, State Fair is a lot of fun. We do it every single year. We have a booth in one of the, all state fairs have the buildings where they set up, and you can go around and browse different companies and different organizations and learn about them. And we're in one of those main buildings that's there that really is completely built around agricultural aspects.
Say
And
they
we set
used to
up,
be 4-H buildings, yeah, back in the
yeah,
day.
and
Anyways,
so
go ahead.
we set up our kiosks that we take to schools, so kids can come up and they can play games and learn about the oil and gas industry as they play games. And then we have a table that's set up there where we have volunteers. I'm there a lot of the time. My staff is there a lot of the time. But we also have a ton of volunteers, and these are oil and gas producers and pumpers and people that work in the industry that volunteer their time to come sit at the state fair. And it's a lot of fun, because all we do for an entire 10 days is sit there and answer questions that the public have about the oil and gas industry, which is perfect for Kansas Strong, because our entire goal is to help people understand what we do, how we do it, why it's important to you, and why it matters to our nation. And this is an opportunity for the public to specifically ask the questions that they want to have answered, and really have walk away with a greater understanding of the oil and gas industry. And of course, you always have the main ones of, how do I get someone to drill on my land? Those types of questions. But we also have some really good questions. We've been confronted by people that have come up and challenged us about fracking. And so we go through the process of hydraulic fracturing. And 99 out of 100 times when we explain what hydraulic fracturing is, it's not at all what they thought it was. And so it's a really good educational opportunity, but it is a very long 10 days. We're at that booth for 12 hours a day, every single day for 10 days in a row.
What's the number one challenge you get from people? I would imagine if you're in Kansas, you've got a mix of college kids with the two. I mean, you got two Division I schools in Kansas. So I mean, in North Dakota, I mean, where I grew up, we have 500,000 people. It's not. I mean, so I mean, you can. Ann Arbor, Michigan's bigger than North Dakota. I mean, so I mean, it's a little bit different, but I would imagine that you would get challenged from time to time, Warren, with some young kids, maybe a Charlie Kirk wannabe or something.
Yeah, it would be a good study. I know how much you like media and talking about the history of media and those types of things. That would be a good place to study media impact, because the challenges we get are directly dependent upon what is in the media that year. So when we had some earthquakes back in 2016, 17, 18, that area, Oklahoma predominantly had the earthquakes, but we had some up here. That was the main challenge we got, was all about earthquakes. When Greta came out and she was railing against the oil and gas industry, everybody was talking about fracking and how bad fracking was. And so really the challenge that we get every year is directly dependent upon what the news media has been reporting on. And I expect this year that the number one thing that people are going to be talking to us about is reliability. We've had a lot of rate increases that have been considered and passed when it comes to electric costs. All of those rate increases, a big part of the push to get those rate increases was the talk about reliability, that we need to build an energy system that's reliable. So I expect that this year we're going to get a lot of people asking us about reliability here in Kansas because it's been a big topic in the media this year.
Where does most of your energy come from in Kansas? Is
Well,
that Black Hills Energy? Who has?
Black Hills is a major player here. Evergy is our largest
Okay.
supplier here in Kansas. Of course, here we have a tremendous amount of wind energy. We have a little bit of solar. We have nuclear energy. We have gas, natural gas. We have oil energy. So we have all of the components really at play here in Kansas that vary at different times as to their contribution. But for decades, there was a huge push in Kansas towards wind energy in particular,
Yeah.
where at one point in time, up to 60% of the energy in the grid was, or electricity in the grid was coming from wind. Of course, at other times, less than 2% was coming from the same grid, depending on when the wind blew and when the wind didn't blow. And so the idea back then was just build more windmills to compensate for those down periods. And now the energy companies are really coming back. We've had several natural gas plants that have been proposed to be built for the purpose of reliability. We have had coal plants that were scheduled for decommission that they're trying to delay the decommission for the sake of reliability. And so really reliability has been a big conversation here.
Where's your nuclear plant at?
Our nuclear plant is just to the east of Emporia, up there. So about one third, not quite one third, one fourth of the way from Emporia to Kansas City, right off the turnpike there. You can see it.
People don't
At
realize
Arlington.
that, like in Minnesota, I'm literally 2.5 hours away from a nuclear plant,
Yeah.
Monticello, Minnesota. It's just right down the interstate. And um, people forget that there are, these I guess they'd be mid-size nuclear plants because they're not quite the micro plants that they're talking about today or the 3 Mile Island size that they have out in New York. But are you getting any nuclear talk in Kansas with data centers and AI? Boy, these data centers that they're starting to rush contracts through, they're finding out now that boy, they need a lot more energy than they thought before. The water used to cool them down is much more than they thought. And do they really produce jobs? I don't know. So, I mean, what are you guys getting any nuclear or data center AI talk there?
A little bit of talk, not really a whole lot of action on that front. Nuclear is one of those third rail issues with a lot of people in the American public because they grew up with all of the stories of the monsters that came from radioactive material. I mean, how many superheroes are derivative from, or evil villains derivative from nuclear exposure, radiation exposure? So, we all grew up in that world where we were terrified of it. And so, really, in a large portion, it's a third rail here in the United States, where up until Tennessee built those two nuclear plants, was that 2 years ago that they opened a commission? We really hadn't built any new nuclear plants since the 1970s. And so, I think that there is a great opportunity there for American energy to really look at nuclear. The technology has come so much further than it was in the 1970s when those nuclear plants were originally built. And so I think there's great opportunity there. I think the hurdle that you've got to get over is the not in my backyard, getting past the fears of the American people. And so there's been some conversation here, but no serious conversation that has looked at tackling, overcoming the fears of the public to actually do something.
I grew up with the day after the think it was I don't know, ABC Sunday night movie or something like that. But it was the story of a family trying to survive a nuclear fallout, and of course, those images of just the people instantly turning into dust and everything like that. Man, that's hard to overcome. That is a tough. And I'm talking about a nuclear bomb. We're talking about a nuclear reactor, for crying out loud. Those are two completely different things.
Yep.
But the word nuclear didn't matter.
Right.
Triggered the thought right away. So I immediately shut it down. Reefer madness, just boom, shut it down right away. But when you talk about the world of nuclear, uh, the advancements, we used to interview Dwayne Sand, have a Navy day. Dwayne Sand, he was a Navy man. He's on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for a long time out of Chicago. He's from Grand Forks or Bismarck, North Dakota. Has a frack water business out in the Bakken. AB Pizza, I think he's got or New York style pizza. He's got a pizza place too. But anyway, he was a big advocate for nuclear energy, and he kind of got pushed aside now that it's kind of the new sexy thing. You know what I mean? Now that all these new businessmen are coming forward, that's why I think it's going to work, because they're using all that research for the last 40, 50 years that basically submarines have used. That they're taking it and put it on a micro scale somewhere. So anyway, it's going to be interesting to see what happened. I didn't know you guys had a nuclear power plant in Kansas. So obviously it's been there, like you say, since the 70s. So it's been there for a long time. And then one last question that's kind of outside the box of your expertise. Of course, Warren Martin, Kansas Strong, primarily for the oil and gas industry. However, the oil and gas industry is the energy industry, and oil and gas companies are all the above. I got a kick out of the some people called the wind and solar industry the compliance department for oil and gas companies, to a certain degree, as we're starting to see that with the carbon industry. But Kansas does have a pretty big carbon storage potential as far as the geography and the porousness. I'm not sure if the technology is there or if the regulatory is there, but where is Kansas with the carbon management industry? I know the potential's there, Warren.
Yeah, that's becoming a much larger part of our industry here. And a lot of times you're talking about some of the same producers that are working on that as oil and gas. Like I said, we've had our oil field is one of the oldest oil fields in the United States. We've been pumping oil and gas out of the ground for well over 100 years. And there is a lot of opportunity, especially in western Kansas, for carbon sequestration. And I've talked with um, uh, some of the seismic people in the state, the different companies that do seismic in the state. That's becoming a much larger part of their business, because anytime you're looking at sequestration, you have to run seismic on it to ensure that it will be captured and won't escape. And then you have to run seismic on it periodically. I think every 2 years or 3 years, you have to run seismic on it again to make sure nothing is shifted to where it is still captured in that formation. But we have a lot of formations out west that are very viable for CO2. There's been talk a little bit about building a CO2 pipeline to be able to utilize those to a greater extent. There's been a few pushes to try and put together the resources to be able to do that. It has not gone forward at this point, but I think that there is a lot of activity moving in that direction. I think we'll see a lot more of it here in the state of Kansas.
All right. You've got some other things on the television as well and on the radio. Just an update on that for public television. Turning Point with Dennis Quaid, changing the conversation in the oil and gas industry. And on the radio, completely separate campaign. You have one trying to connect with the more of the average person, if you will. And then, of course, with Glenn Beck, a little bit more of a passionate, or somebody like you used to say, somebody a little more active. Give us an update on those campaigns. How are they doing?
Uh, Campaigns are doing good. Viewpoint with Dennis Quaid.
Oh, did I say
Uh,
Turning Point?
yeah, you said Turning Point.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right. Viewpoint with Dennis Quaid. It's still running on public television, available for public television. If you're listening to this and you want to see it, then call up your local public television station and ask them to run it. Because it is open and free to them to be able to run. They have to pull it down and put it on and schedule it. So we're still getting some play from that. The Glenn Beck campaign is going really well. We're getting a lot of activity from it. People that are sharing our content on social media, that are going to our website, getting information, and talking about it. So both those are really good campaigns going forward. We're just now starting to look at our fall campaign. We generally launch a new campaign in the fall. Um, so we're evaluating. We'll wait till these next two conferences happen to kind of see what people are talking about and what they're struggling with. We'll wait till after the state fair, because one of the great things about all of these conferences and state fair is I get a lot of feedback to figure out, okay, this is what we need to hit this year, because this is what people are asking questions about. This is what people are interested in. This is what we need to hit to be able to, because our whole goal is to help them understand the industry. And so in order to do that, you have to start with where they're at. So this is a great listening time for us to really figure out what our next campaign is going to be that we'll kick off later this fall.
And I just pulled up the assessment of potential storage for carbon in the United States. The source on that is the NATCARB, must be the National Association Carbon. Anyway, I'm looking at it quick here, Warren. Sorry to sidetrack for a second, but I just one of those guys that seems like he has to follow through on things and cross it off the list. And yeah, the potential is very similar to North Dakota in terms of some of the size of the underground fields and potentials. And North Dakota is a little bit more of the oil and gas porous side, but boy, you're just as close. I think Kansas might be easily in the top 5 for carbon potential storage looking at this map. So we'll have to tease that for another date, as well as we'll have to get our tease for the keynote speech coming up on September 11th for the event down in Kansas for the Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas Association, where we're going to be talking about kind of the history of pop culture, on how it's influenced our public perception on the oil and gas industry. Looking forward to that. It's the debut of that keynote speech. And yeah, any final thoughts, Warren?
No, I'm looking forward to it too. I think we've called it the Black Gold on Silver Screens as the title for our keynote speech. And I think this will be a first time that you and I have been on stage. This will be as many times as we've been talking. For how many years have we been talking to each other now? And as many times we talk, this will be the first time we've actually ever met in
I think
person.
so, in person. Yeah, I don't think we've ever
Yeah.
met in person, have we?
We've never met in person. So first time we'll meet in person is on a stage doing a keynote together. So that'll be a lot of fun, and excited about that going forward. And so besides that, I'm looking forward to it, and thank you for having me on.
You bet. And I'm just going to do a quick plug here. If anybody would like, the day of, when everybody's out golfing, I will be back conducting interviews. So if anybody doesn't make it on the golf course and they want to talk a little podcast and a little radio and just what's going on in the industry, feel free. I will have the setup there for the Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas Association, September 11th. And one more plug here for Landman and Paramount Plus. We do have a discount link that if you'd like to go ahead and click on any of the show pages that you see here on the Crude Life, a few pennies get trickled down into our coffee can. That helps keeps the lights on from time to time. We're not retiring off it, Warren, but I figured, you know what? I don't think I've really ever plugged it, and I'm supposed to be plugging it. And every time I listen to these other podcasts, they spend more time plugging than they do anything else. And I'm thinking, God, I should probably do that from time to time, at least to end it, so I can remind people. But anyway, we're going to try to do a Landman premiere party, by the way, in different states and different locations at the same time. Like, so we'll try to get one in Kansas. We were just talking to Joe Sinnott about out in Pittsburgh, out in the Marcellus. We're going to try to, and so that way we can kind of hop around and maybe even get somebody like Billy Bob or whatever to do a recorded message for us to thank us for coming out. I mean, live would be dreaming in the stars, but maybe we can get something since we have somewhat of a relationship with them at Paramount. So anyway, there's my plug, Warren. How about for you? Any final plugs you want to get in?
Well, I work in the oil and gas industry, and plugging is never good in the oil and gas industry. That's always a bad thing.
Any
And
pumping you want to do? Any pumping up you want to do?
the only pumping I want to do is if you're in Kansas and you're going to come out to State Fair, stop by and see the Kansas Strong booth. If you want to find out more about our organization, go to kansasstrong.com. We always have stuff going on. And if you're going to any of the conferences here in Kansas, come look us up. We give away free T-shirts at all the conferences we go to. So come find us and get a free T-shirt.